It began with silence, and then, the sudden roar of death. In 1943, German U-boats started vanishing. One after another, gone. They were supposed to be invisible, the hunters of the Atlantic, ghosting through fog and darkness. Yet now they were being stalked, found, and destroyed, often without warning. German commanders were baffled. Their boats were stealthy, their codes unbroken, their captains among the best in the world. So how could the Allies be finding them in the middle of the ocean? The truth lay inside a strange, humming device, captured from an Allied bomber and brought before a table of German admirals. When they turned it on and saw the green light sweep across its screen, the realization struck like thunder. The Allies could see what was once invisible. And in that moment, the men who had once ruled the Atlantic understood, they were already beaten. The ocean was their kingdom. From beneath its black surface, they struck without warning, silent predators, slipping through the depths like shadows. For nearly 3 years, the German U-boats ruled the Atlantic. They called themselves Die Grauen Wolf, the Grey Wolves, and to the Allied convoys they hunted, that name meant one thing: death. The year is 1942. Europe burns, and Britain clings to survival by the thinnest of threads. Every drop of oil, every crate of food, every bullet and bandage must cross the sea. The Atlantic convoys, columns of merchant ships stretching for miles, carry the lifeblood of an island nation. And waiting for them, somewhere in the dark, are the U-boats. They move like ghosts, surfacing only at night to recharge their batteries. In the cramped, sweating air of the submarine, men work by the dim red glow of instruments. The smell of diesel and salt never leaves their clothes. At the center of this machine is one man, Admiral Karl Donitz, commander of the U-boat arm. To him, submarines are not just weapons, they are strategy incarnate. His wolfpack tactic, Rudel tactic, is elegant and merciless. One U-boat spots a convoy, reports its position through coded radio bursts, and within hours, a dozen more converge. In the darkness, they attack as one, ripping open the convoy's belly before vanishing beneath the waves. For a time, it seems unstoppable. Allied sailors begin to dread the night. Survivors tell stories of torpedoes that come without sound, of flames reflecting on cold water, of screams swallowed by the sea. Churchill later admits, "The U-boat peril was the only thing that really frightened me." But then, something changes. It starts subtly, like a shift in the wind. One U-boat fails to return from patrol. Then another. Then 5 more in a single week. Reports from the front become confused, fragmented. Messages cut off mid-transmission. Aircraft attack. 51 degrees north, and then static. Donitz stares at the maps pinned across his wall. Red flags mark his missing boats. He grips the edge of the table, knuckles white. "They are finding us," he mutters. But how? His staff has no answer. The Allied air patrols seem to know exactly where to strike. Even boats traveling radio silent are being discovered in mid-ocean. The U-boat captains are equally baffled. They surface only under cloud cover, only at night, miles from shipping lanes, yet again and again, a spotlight cuts through the dark, followed by the thunder of engines and the howl of bombs. Some of them start to whisper about black magic. Others blame spies, or traitors, or even cursed luck. In the cold belly of the Atlantic, the tension thickens. Crews begin surfacing less, keeping their boats underwater longer than the batteries can handle. The air becomes thick with carbon dioxide. Men faint at their posts. But the fear of being seen is worse. The English can see through the night, one sailor writes in his diary. They know where we are before we do. Back in occupied France, at the U-boat pens of Lorient and Saint-Nazaire, new boats prepare for sea. Families wave from the docks as the submarines glide out, their steel hulls gleaming under floodlights. Few of those men will return. By early 1943, the wolfpacks are being slaughtered. Entire patrols vanish without a trace. The radio rooms of the Kriegsmarine grow quieter. Donitz paces before his subordinates, eyes burning beneath his cap. "We are being hunted," he says, "but no one can tell me why." He demands reports from the Intelligence Division, from the Radar Research Department, from the Luftwaffe. None can explain how the British seem to find their boats in open ocean, at night, in fog. He orders his engineers to check for leaks in radio signals. They invent the Metox detector, a crude receiver meant to pick up Allied radar emissions. The sailors are told it will save them. When a warning tone sounds, they dive, believing they've escaped detection. But it changes nothing. The losses continue. Soon, the North Atlantic feels smaller. Once a vast arena of stealth and surprise, it now seems to close in on them like a trap. The convoys sail with aircraft overhead, planes that appear out of nowhere, dropping depth charges with uncanny precision. From above, the radar screens of Allied bombers sweep in silent circles. Each pulse paints a dot, a shadow on the sea that cannot hide. The German admirals, still unaware of what they're truly facing, grow desperate. They change tactics, shift patrol zones, order their captains to dive deeper, stay longer. It makes no difference. The U-boats are dying faster than they can be replaced. At night, in the command bunker at Carnival, Donitz stands before the war map once more. The red pins now cover more of the sea than the blue. Behind him, the officers whisper. He turns, his voice low and bitter, "The Atlantic has betrayed us." Something unseen was hunting the hunters. Something the Germans couldn't measure, couldn't hear, couldn't touch. The ocean that had once been theirs, was shrinking. At the start of 1943, the war in the Atlantic was a race of science. In London, the losses from U-boat attacks had nearly strangled Britain's supply lines. Convoys could not cross the ocean without risking annihilation. But in the shadows of the countryside, far from the chaos of the docks, another kind of battle was being fought, one of wavelengths, magnetrons, and invisible light. Bawdsey Manor stood on the windswept edge of Suffolk, a sprawling estate turned secret laboratory. Here, British scientists and engineers were building weapons not of steel and fire, but of signal and silence. Among them was a small group working on something radically new, microwaves, electromagnetic waves so short and precise that they could paint pictures of the unseen. The early radar systems Britain had used during the Battle of Britain were powerful but crude. They worked on long wavelengths, useful for spotting aircraft at high altitudes, but useless over the ocean, where waves and weather drowned their signals. When the sea heaved, the echoes blurred into static. No radar could distinguish between the peak of a wave and the curved spine of a submarine. Then came a breakthrough. Two researchers, John Randall and Harry Boot, working in a cramped university basement, built a small copper device that hummed like a wasp, the cavity magnetron. It generated microwaves 1,000 times shorter than those used before. That difference, invisible and abstract, changed everything. These waves bounced cleanly off metal, cutting through fog, rain, and darkness. They could detect a periscope jutting from the waves, the thin rail of a conning tower, the glint of steel in black water. Soon, the Royal Air Force and the Royal Navy's Coastal Command began testing airborne radar units built around the magnetron. The new system was called Air-to-Surface Vessel Radar, Mark III, ASV Mk3 for short. Engineers mounted it on long-range patrol aircraft, wiring its bulky screens and humming transmitters into cramped fuselages. Pilots trained to read the flickering green scopes, learning to interpret each faint blip as life or death. The first night they used it operationally, it seemed almost supernatural. An aircraft flying hundreds of miles off the Irish coast picked up a faint echo on its screen, a tiny pulse moving through static. The pilot banked, following the ghostly shape. Below, unaware of the danger, a U-boat cruised on the surface, batteries recharging. When the aircraft closed in, its crew switched on a massive spotlight fixed beneath the fuselage, the lee light. The sea exploded with white brilliance. The U-boat crew barely had time to shout before the bombs hit. By dawn, word spread through Coastal Command. The combination of radar and light had worked perfectly. For the first time, Allied aircraft could strike U-boats in total darkness. There was no warning, no chance to dive. The hunters were being hunted. As missions increased, the reports multiplied. German submarines were being caught mid-surface, mid-repair, mid-sleep. Crews described planes that appeared from nowhere, even on the blackest nights. It was as if the sky itself had eyes. In the workshops at Malvern, technicians worked around the clock to refine the system. They replaced vacuum tubes, rewired circuits, recalibrated magnetrons. Each improvement made detection sharper, faster, deadlier. The radar's sweep could now reach across 20 miles of sea, tracing a submarine silhouette against the waves. For the air crews, the technology became instinct. They would watch the green line sweep around the scope, waiting for a flicker, one small echo that might mean a U-boat surfacing. The silence before the attack was electric. A slight turn of the dial, a low hum, the coordinates whispered to the pilot. Then engines roared, bombs fell, and another dot disappeared from the sea. Meanwhile, the Germans noticed their luck collapsing. Boats that once patrolled for months were now destroyed within days. Captains wrote confused messages, sighted aircraft at night, no moon visible. Attack came from nowhere. Impossible to avoid. In Berlin, analysts puzzled over how the British could locate them without radio signals. They suspected a new kind of sound detection, or perhaps a spy within their fleet. None guessed the truth, that every time a periscope broke the surface, it painted a bright mark on an invisible canvas in the sky. The Allies did not announce their discovery. They kept radar a secret so absolute that even many pilots did not know how it worked. It was simply called the gear. Orders were strict: if your aircraft crashed, destroy the set. Never let it fall into enemy hands. By spring of 1943, the results were undeniable. The number of U-boats destroyed doubled, then tripled. The once mighty wolfpacks began to scatter, their commanders terrified to surface. Those who did were greeted not by darkness, but by the harsh glare of a lee light and the scream of bombs cutting through rain. And still, the British pushed further. They began mounting radar not just on aircraft, but on escort ships and carriers, knitting the ocean into a network of detection. The Atlantic, once a void of mystery, was becoming transparent. The magnetron, a device no larger than a teacup, had turned the tide of the war. But its victims did not yet know its name. To the men trapped inside the pressure hulls of the U-boats, it was something else entirely, a curse that lived in the clouds, something that could see through storms, through darkness, through the ocean itself. Above them, unseen, the radar antennae kept spinning, sweeping invisible lines across the water, marking every hidden shape in their path. Each pulse of energy was a countdown, a silent signal that death was coming. The ocean had become smaller, the night brighter, and the shadows of the hunters, suddenly, terribly, visible. The attack had come in the dark. A shadow overhead, a distant hum, then the sea itself erupting around them. The U-boat had barely survived, half flooded, its batteries ruined. The captain ordered it to surface, hoping for air, for light, for anything. But within hours, Allied destroyers closed in. Depth charges rolled from their sides, falling into the deep like ticking clocks. The explosions ripped the sea open. Men screamed, lights flickered, steel groaned. When the order finally came to abandon ship, the Atlantic swallowed the boat whole. The survivors were fished out of the freezing water and taken aboard the British escort vessel. They were shivering, some crying, others staring blankly into space. For the Allies, it was more than a rescue, it was an opportunity. Within hours, British sailors descended into the crippled U-boat before it sank completely, searching for documents, codebooks, and equipment. What they found was a tangled mass of wires, dials, and an unfamiliar black box bolted to the control room wall. It was labeled Metox. The sailors didn't know it then, but this small, crude device was the key to the mystery that had haunted the Germans for months. The Metox R.600A was a radar detector, designed to pick up the long-wave signals of Allied aircraft radar. The U-boats carried it to warn them of danger in the sky, a shrill buzz meant to signal when enemy planes were near. But the irony was brutal, the device that was supposed to save them was actually killing them. British engineers quickly recognized what it was. When they brought the captured Metox set to the technical labs in London, they realized its fatal flaw: it emitted a weak, but detectable, signal of its own. While trying to listen for Allied radar, it was broadcasting its presence across the ocean. In effect, every U-boat carrying one was announcing itself to the enemy. The British intelligence officers smiled grimly. The Germans, it seemed, were fighting blindfolded. Meanwhile, in occupied France, rumors of the loss reached Admiral Donitz. His intelligence staff intercepted reports that Allied ships had recovered something from a sunken U-boat. Within days, fragments of Allied radar equipment, wreckage from a downed aircraft, were brought to Germany for analysis. Engineers crowded around the remains: a metal dish, coiled cables, glass tubes that hummed faintly even when dead. It was unlike anything they had built. The investigation shifted to Kiel, one of the centers of the Kriegsmarine's research network. In a dimly lit workshop, high-ranking admirals gathered around a table as technicians pieced together the captured components. When they powered it on, a green light flickered across a circular screen. A fine line of light swept around and around, sending out invisible pulses into the air. Each time the signal hit metal, a blip appeared, a heartbeat on glass. The room fell silent. One of the admirals stepped forward, his face pale. "So this is how they find us," he whispered. The realization spread like a chill. The Allies could see through night, through fog, through storms. There was no need for spies, no need for luck. The ocean was no longer hiding them. In the days that followed, panic rippled through the submarine command. Reports were rewritten, orders revised. Donitz demanded every technical explanation his scientists could provide. They told him about the new wavelength, shorter, more precise, impossible for their detectors to sense. The Germans had been listening to the wrong part of the spectrum, guarding themselves against ghosts while the real enemy operated beyond their reach. The engineers tried to recover. They began work on a new detector, codenamed Naxos, designed to catch the elusive microwave signals. But it was too late. The Allies had already changed frequencies again. Each improvement on one side was countered by another leap on the other. The captured radar was sent from Kiel to Berlin, where physicists studied it under armed guard. Some stared at it with awe, others with quiet horror. It was both elegant and terrifying, a perfect marriage of physics and purpose. They realized how far behind they were. While German scientists had been focusing on refining radio and sonar, the British and Americans had been perfecting the art of invisibility. The admirals left the lab that night in silence. One of them, an older man with a weathered face, paused at the doorway and looked back at the glowing screen. "It was never the ocean that betrayed us," he said softly. "It was ignorance." Far out at sea, the U-boats still fought on, unaware that their fate had already been decided. They continued to surface under cover of darkness, still trusting their detectors, still believing they could vanish when they dived. But each time they rose, a distant aircraft saw them, a single pulse of radar light bouncing off steel, painting a target on the waves. The crews never knew what hit them. A faint hum, a shape in the clouds, then fire from above. The ocean that once offered protection now exposed them completely. In Germany, the scientists worked frantically, drawing diagrams, testing prototypes, trying to close the gap. But no invention, no last-minute miracle could undo what they now understood. The Allies' radar was not just a new weapon, it was a new kind of vision. The war beneath the waves had become a war of frequencies, and the Germans were deaf. In the spring of 1943, the U-boat war reached its breaking point. What had once been the pride of the German Navy was becoming its graveyard. Convoys that had once scattered in panic now sailed with air cover, with radar-guided ships and planes circling like hawks above them. The wolfpacks gathered as they always had, but when they attacked, the sky answered. The first warning came in early May. Reports from the Atlantic told of submarines bombed within hours of contact, of aircraft appearing in places thought unreachable. Admiral Donitz, still clinging to hope, ordered one more full-scale offensive. 50 U-boats were dispatched to strike the convoy routes west of Ireland. They were the largest concentration of submarines ever assembled. To the crews, it felt like destiny, the chance to reclaim the ocean. The first week was a massacre. The radar-equipped Liberators and Sunderlands swept through the fog like predators that could smell fear. The Allied escort carriers, floating airfields in the middle of the sea, launched planes that patrolled every hour of the day. The moment a U-boat surfaced, its location was marked on radar, radioed to the fleet, and swarmed within minutes. One by one, the submarines were hit. Some never even fired a torpedo. Others managed to send a brief message before vanishing. The signals arriving at German command were desperate, clipped, filled with static and fear. Under attack, multiple aircraft, no visibility, diving, and then nothing. In the operations bunker, Donitz listened in silence. The pins on the map disappeared faster than they could be replaced. Entire groups, dozens of men, thousands of tons of steel, simply ceased to exist. The admiral who once boasted that the U-boat arm could choke Britain now faced the truth: the Atlantic had turned against him. Inside the submarines that survived, life became unbearable. They were forced to remain submerged for days, rationing air, moving at crawling speed to avoid detection. The men breathed in recycled carbon dioxide, their lungs burning, their heads pounding. The engines were silent, the ocean pressed on all sides. Each creak of the hull felt like the whisper of death. When they finally surfaced for air, they did so under pitch-black skies, terrified to stay up for more than a few minutes. The attacks came anyway. Radar didn't care about darkness. The ocean lit up in explosions and burning oil. Sailors clung to wreckage, staring up at the black silhouettes of aircraft that circled like vultures. By the end of May, 41 submarines were gone. Donitz called it Der Schwarzmai, Black May. It was the moment the hunters became the hunted for good. In Berlin, the naval command turned frantic. Every department was ordered to find a solution. Scientists in Kiel, Berlin, and Hamburg worked day and night on countermeasures. They built new radar detectors, new coatings for the hulls, new devices meant to jam the Allied signals. But for every step they took, the Allies were already 2 steps ahead. The Germans introduced the Naxos radar detector. Within weeks, the Allies had shifted to a frequency it couldn't catch. Desperation led to invention. The engineers introduced the Schnorchel, a retractable breathing tube that allowed submarines to run their diesel engines while submerged. It was supposed to make them invisible again, letting them stay below the surface indefinitely. But the snorkels leaked, vibrated, and betrayed their position with bubbles on calm days. The crews hated them. Many said it felt like drowning slowly instead of suddenly. By late 1943, morale in the U-boat arm had collapsed. Sailors went to sea knowing the odds were hopeless. Letters home were shorter, quieter. Some captains confessed in their logs that they no longer believed victory was possible. "We are no longer wolves," one wrote. "We are the rats now." The Atlantic convoys, once symbols of fear, became symbols of Allied dominance. Ships sailed in tighter formations, guarded by radar-guided destroyers and aircraft flying in rotation. The air crews grew confident, almost casual, as they tracked the faint echoes of submarines rising from the depths. Each blip on the radar screen meant another chase, another explosion, another victory. Germany's technological empire began to crumble under the weight of reality. Donitz pleaded with Hitler for new resources, promising that with improved submarines they could still turn the tide. But the war was spreading, and the Luftwaffe and the army consumed everything. Steel, manpower, fuel, all gone to other fronts. The U-boat fleet was left to die slowly. In the cold waters north of the Azores, a lone submarine drifted at periscope depth. The captain, barely 30, scanned the horizon through fog. He had heard the rumors: new Allied weapons, planes that could see through clouds, ships that could fire in total darkness. He didn't believe it until the moment the sky flashed white. The roar came seconds later. Depth charges tore through the hull. The sea rushed in. Back on the docks in France, the few surviving boats returned in silence. Their paint was blistered, their crews hollow-eyed. Dockworkers didn't cheer anymore. They just watched as the submarines slid in, slower each time, fewer each month. The great promise of the U-boat war had become a procession of ghosts. In August, Donitz gave the order that no one expected. He recalled the entire fleet. The wolfpacks would sail no more. He had no choice. The losses were unsustainable, the enemy unstoppable. In his private journal that night, he wrote a single line: "The enemy sees what we cannot hide." And somewhere in a British laboratory, another radar dish turned, its signal sweeping across the water. Each pulse reached farther, sharper, faster. The waves carried the echoes home, marking every shadow that dared to move beneath them. The invisible war was no longer invisible. The sea, once Germany's refuge, had become their executioner. In a storage hangar outside Hamburg, British officers moved through rows of crates marked with the Black Eagle of the Reich. They opened one after another: components, blueprints, half-finished devices. Among them sits a radar set, nearly identical to the one that had doomed the U-boats. Its glass screen is cracked, but when a technician connects it to a generator, a thin line of green still flickers across. The air hums faintly, like memory refusing to die. Elsewhere, Allied teams comb through the laboratories at Kiel and Piemont, taking photographs, copying research papers, interviewing captured scientists. They discover how far the Germans had come in their desperation: prototypes of the Naxos radar detector, the Tunis jammer, the early Schnorchel systems. None of it had been enough. Their brilliance had been outpaced by the invisible race of technology already won by the Allies. The war had been a crucible for ideas. The magnetron, the heart of British radar, became one of the most valuable secrets of all. It was shipped across the Atlantic under armed guard, its design studied by American engineers. Within months, laboratories in Massachusetts and Washington were reproducing it, improving it, turning wartime urgency into post-war industry. In 1945, the laboratories that had built weapons of detection began building something else entirely. The same radar pulses that once revealed submarines were now being used to track weather, to guide aircraft, to watch the movements of clouds instead of enemies. In one test flight, an engineer watched a storm appear on the radar screen, the same eerie green glow that had once meant death, and he smiled. The world had turned its instruments toward peace. Yet not everyone saw it that way. In the new world divided between East and West, radar became the foundation of something even larger: early warning systems. The Soviets raced to develop their own, the Americans built networks across continents. From coastal towers to Arctic stations, the sweep of the radar became the watchful pulse of a nervous planet. What began as a secret in the belly of bombers now guarded entire nations. In kitchens across America, another kind of revolution began quietly. Engineers experimenting with surplus magnetrons noticed something strange: the chocolate bar in one man's pocket melted while he worked near the active device. That accident led to the invention of the microwave oven. The same force that had once burned submarines in the Atlantic would now heat dinner in a suburban home. In the decades that followed, the traces of the U-boat war lingered beneath the surface of ordinary life. The scientists who had designed radar moved into academia, building the foundations of modern electronics and communication. The laboratories that once hid in English manors became part of universities and corporations. Their wartime secrecy faded into research papers and patents. In Germany, the legacy was quieter. The surviving U-boat pens, massive fortresses of concrete built to withstand bombs, remained where they were, too large to destroy. Birds nested in their cracks, moss crept across the walls. Tourists would later walk through them in silence, their footsteps echoing off the same chambers where young sailors had once stood, waiting for orders that would lead them to the deep. For the men who had fought under the sea, the memories never left. Some spoke of the radar as if it had been a phantom, an invisible predator that stalked them through fog and night. Others simply refused to talk about it at all. In post-war interviews, a few admitted that when they finally understood how the Allies had found them, they felt not anger, but awe. One former captain said quietly, "It was science that killed us, not hate." The truth was that radar had done more than end a battle, it had changed the very way humans perceived their world. It extended sight beyond the horizon, beyond the weather, beyond the night. It became a symbol of control over uncertainty, a way to make the invisible visible. The same technology that once pulsed across the Atlantic in search of submarines would one day guide planes through storms, map the surface of other planets, and scan the depths of space. In the archives of the Royal Air Force Museum, an old radar set sits under glass. The plaque beside it reads, ASV Mk3, Air-to-Surface Vessel Radar, 1943. Instrumental in defeating the German U-boat threat. Visitors walk past it, unaware that the green sweep on its screen once dictated life and death on the open ocean. Far below the waves, the wrecks still rest. Hundreds of U-boats lie scattered across the seabed, silent, preserved in cold darkness. The ocean has reclaimed them, but not their story. Each hull tells of a time when the limits of human vision were redrawn by a single captured machine. And above them, satellites now orbit the planet, scanning the seas with radar millions of times more powerful than anything imagined in 1943. They trace the same waters, the same currents, the same invisible lines that once decided a war. The pulse still travels through the air, an unbroken rhythm born from fear, refined by genius, and inherited by a world that learned to see too late.